in terms of the pathway to achieving net zero by 2070. You also mentioned that it was slightly later than other countries had done, and I think it's important for us as we frame these climate responses across countries, not really to be comparative across countries, because the whole framework is predicated on an idea of common but differentiated responsibilities. One of the things that we've been doing is working with governments and other stakeholders to be able to generate that kind of data set, to be able to support decision making. Today, the LEDs now represent almost the entire market. There's still a small amount of incandescents and tubular fluorescent lights in the market, but we think that will continue to get erased, and CFLs have been pretty much entirely disposed because of.
Hello and welcome to a very special podcast series, Unusual Suspects. I'm your host, Gaurav Chaudhary. This is a series about unraveling stories of entrepreneurs, investors and businesses, and of course professionals, who are disruptors yet not in your face. Their disruptions have consistently delivered on the purpose and the mission they've embarked on. Their values are as strong as the mission. While they're ruthless in pursuing their ambition, they don't stray from being leaders who are not just admired for the vision and relentless pursuit, but also for how they're building an ecosystem of believers who consistently push the boundaries. They allow principles to take precedence over ad hocism. For them, profitability is as important as scale, creating and leading new categories and innovations. In each episode, I speak to one such leader, talking to her or him or them about their businesses, lives, inspirations, interests, challenges, pivot moments and turning points, successes, failures, agonies and ecstasies, and of course, the little joys. It is as much about their personal life stories as about their entrepreneurial journeys. Unusual Suspects streams on Earshot.in, Spotify.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, moneycontrol.com, and a host of other podcast streaming platforms. For this episode, I'm delighted to have Bishal Thapa, Senior Director at CLASP, our leading international non-profit organization with a primary focus on people, planet, and appliances, working towards enabling an energy-efficient future. It serves at the epicenter of collaborative efforts, working closely with policymakers globally to create and implement energy-efficient policies to achieve net zero emissions and enable equitable access to clean energy for all. In his current capacity, Bishal is helping lead CLASP's engagements within India and across the region to advance appliance efficiency policy, clean energy and energy access, besides supporting and expanding CLASP's partnerships with governments, businesses and civil society. Welcome to Unusual Suspects, Bishal.
Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you for the warm introduction, and more importantly, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this session on Unusual Suspects. It's a great privilege for me to have the opportunity to represent an important segment in the climate discussions around energy efficiency. And I think this session around Unusual Suspect is a very apt name for the issue of energy efficiency, because in some sense, the millions of consumers, policymakers, government stakeholders that are working on energy efficiency and enabling one of the biggest drivers of responding to the climate challenge are in some sense the unsung heroes of the climate challenge and the response we are framing. So it's a great privilege to be here. I'm very delighted to be able to represent the work of CLASP and my colleagues around the world to this session. Thank you, Gaurav.
Thank you, Bishal. On November 1, 2021, Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced that India will achieve the target of net zero emissions by 2070. While it is 2 decades later than the deadline that the United Kingdom has set, and a decade later than China, this is the first time India has set the target for achieving net zero goals. India has set a clock for itself and the world to make the planet's atmosphere less toxic. What are the key things from an energy efficiency point of view which we need to do to achieve this goal? Bishal?
Excellent question, Gaurav. And I think it's a great question to try to frame this conversation to begin with. As you mentioned, in 2021, the Honorable Prime Minister at COP delivered what he called the 5 elements or the 5 nectars of Panchamrit that would frame India's response to climate. That was increasing renewable energy to 500 gigawatts by 2030, having renewable energy meet 50% of the energy by 2030, decreasing CO2 emissions by 1 billion ton by 2030, decreasing the carbon intensity by 45% by 2030 over 2005 levels, and net zero by 2070. These are all interrelated goals. And as you can see, within it, a key part focuses around reducing the carbon intensity of the economy by 45% by 2030 over 2005 levels. Now, that's an ambitious goal. It's, as you mentioned, it frames the overall response in terms of the pathway to achieving net zero by 2070. You also mentioned that it was slightly later than other countries had done. And I think it's important for us as we frame these climate responses across countries, not really to be comparative across countries, because the whole framework is predicated on an idea of common but differentiated responsibilities. What we're seeking from countries around the world is essentially to be able to do the maximum that they can do within their context, within their national situations, priorities, challenges, etc. And different countries are at different situations. Within that, I think India has taken considerable leadership in the climate response, not just recently, but going back almost 30 years, India was one of the first countries to ever participate in the conference that led to the formation of the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. So India has played a key role. Now, within that, energy efficiency is clearly a big part, as the Prime Minister also outlined in his Panchamrit. If you look at overall energy efficiency savings in 21-22, we find that these policies and activities on energy efficiency helped reduce about 250 billion units. And that order of magnitude, that's approximately 17% of demand. So to put it the other way around, if energy efficiency activities have not been there, our demand would be approximately 17% higher that year. And again, to give you a context of that, out of that total energy savings of 250, almost 200 of those came directly from what is called the energy efficiency within appliances, equipment that we use. So, for example, our lights, our ACs, our fans, our TVs, because those products are becoming more and more efficient, that's what's driving part of the energy efficiency. So we need many aspects of the economy to become more efficient. Industrial is one of them, transport is the other. But within a key part of it, as you can see, it's very important that the appliances, products, and equipment that we use also becomes more efficient. In India, approximately 30% of the final energy consumption comes from the residential sector. So that's just people like you and I using TVs, fans, refrigerators, ACs, water coolers, whatever it is. And I think if we can drive down the energy use from those appliances without reducing the quality of service we get from those appliances, that's really what's at the heart of it. And I think a very important part of India's overall response, Gaurav.
Bishal, we are having this conversation at a time when it is extremely difficult to breathe in Delhi and several parts of North India. How can we deal with this? What kind of role do you see of appliances in this, Bishal?
Yeah, that's a great way. As I'm looking out of the window, I can, on a clear day, I can see much of Delhi from the high-rise building where our office is located. Today, it's a pretty stark view of looking into haze. So there are many aspects that contribute to haze. We know that it's pollution from transport. We know that it's pollution that's coming in from crops being burnt in crop stubble being burnt in neighboring states. But we also know that just emissions from the use of fossil fuels and others is contributing to this. The effort to deal with this kind of toxic environment, sort of immediate toxic environment that we see in Delhi and surrounding areas, must also be multifaceted. But one aspect of it is certainly to look at how to reduce energy use, which results in emissions reductions from power plants and other sources where fossil fuels might be burned. Now, there's two aspects to that response. One is we increase the amount of renewable energy, so more of our energy is powered by things like solar and wind, which are clean. But the second aspect, an equally important aspect to that, is energy efficiency. As I mentioned, India consumes about 30% of final energy use in India comes from the residential sector. So that's using appliances and other such devices. There are different ways that we can help improve the efficiency of these appliances that we use. One of the approaches that the government has adopted is to look at regulating the minimum energy performance standards of appliances and equipment through a program called Standards and Labeling that is implemented by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency under India's Energy Conservation Act. Now, that's a very interesting and I think powerful legislative framework that's been developed to be able to enhance the energy efficiency of these products. So under that scheme, what is essentially done is it looks at what are the minimum levels of energy efficiency that must be there in equipment, so that when consumers can go and buy it, they know that's the level they're getting first. And second, they can compare against different types of efficiency levels that are there. So these are the ways that in which improving the energy efficiency of products, equipment, and appliances can help reduce emissions, which in turn can then help reduce this toxicity. And to just put that in perspective, over the last few years that these programs have been there, 58 million tons of CO2 has been saved from efficiency. So that's a pretty substantial number. And if you think about India's overall goal of 1 billion tons of CO2, approximately a quarter of that is going to have to come from energy efficiency, from overall energy efficiency savings. So I think it's critical that we improve the efficiency of appliances, and different schemes such as the Bureau's of Energy Efficiency Standard and Labeling Program that gives consumers access to and choice of high efficient appliances in what is one way to help address that.
Bishal, appliance energy efficiency is one of the fastest and the most cost-effective ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and address rising energy demand. How can we bring about data-driven solutions that address the climate crisis while keeping us connected, comfortable, and productive? Bishal?
Thank you, Gaurav. I think that's again a great question, because what we are finding is that the responses to climate are multifaceted with lots of competing priorities. Right? There isn't one single solution that's solving it. And so as societies, as economies, as governments, as stakeholders, when we begin to address the climate response with a finite set of resources and capabilities, we got to make choices among competing priorities. And one way to do that is to have decision-making that is sound and data-driven. One of the things that we've been doing is working with governments and other stakeholders to be able to generate that kind of data set, to be able to support decision-making. So for example, in the technical analysis support that we provide when we engage with partners such as governments or other stakeholders, we're doing extensive amounts of market research to be able to drive analysis. We're collecting data in terms of choices that consumers are making. We're collecting data in terms of the technical capacity and technical efficiency of these products and appliances. We're looking at what industries are doing. We're looking at choices that different governments are making around the world. We're looking at the flow of products. So it's a fairly comprehensive analysis of data. Across the world, we apply these techniques. In a recently released report, and I invite your listeners also to look at that at the CLASP website, there's a new report we've released called the Net Zero Heroes, where we look at 10 key appliances that is we need to focus on globally, not just India, but globally, to try to accelerate. That analysis is built quite specifically on saying why we need to almost double the efficiency of these key products and appliances, drawing in from data from across it. This data is very important to policymakers such as in India, but also in other countries, which are looking to establish the viability of policies. So, for example, a policymaker in India or a country similar to that, thinking about improving the energy efficiency of, let's say, an appliance like a fan, which is used widely, must take into consideration several aspects. Is it commercially viable for consumers? Is it technically viable? Will the local manufacturing capacity be able to handle this kind of technological innovations in terms of efficiency? Is it also socioeconomically viable? Are there pockets of population that are going to be left out? And so, in order to be able to establish the basis of these questions and concerns, which are very legitimate, we need to be able to generate data. So a lot of the technical analysis that we are providing is very much data-driven and insights-driven, borrowing not just from what we see in India, but across the globe. And our ability to work with partners around the world, I think, is a key part of framing. So overall, we're seeing tremendous amount of cooperation across partners globally in terms of the ability to draw together data and insights, which we think is very important to be able to select the key priorities that we need to push for most immediately as we respond to the climate challenge.
Bishal, how can you leverage super efficient and high quality appliances, accelerate access to and use of renewable energy for the world's poorest people? How can renewable energy services like cooling, communications, and mechanization empower low income communities and improve lives in a climate friendly way? Vishal?
Again, that's I think, Gaurav, you've gotten to the heart of energy efficiency. Energy efficiency has multiple benefits, not just in terms of reducing the energy use, but also what it does is it helps reduce the cost to consumers. So, for example, if you look again at the Standards and Labeling Program, which has been the key policy framework for driving efficiency of products and appliances and equipment in India, you find that over the last over the years of the program, there's been 70 billion units, as I mentioned, from just the Standards and Labeling Program, and it's approximately 200 billion units if you look at efficiency of all appliances. That translates into approximately a 20,000 crore savings for customers. You put it more closely, if you take a highly energy efficient AC, if you were to buy a very baseline low efficiency AC, a consumer may be expected to pay somewhere around 55,000 rupees over the course of its operating life for the energy it consumes. A highly energy efficient AC that is available today might help reduce that cost by almost 15 to 20,000. So it's depending on which state we're in, what is the cost of electricity, obviously. So that's a fairly substantial savings. So what it does is that efficiency is helping make the operating costs of that product appliance a lot cheaper. But at the same time, we've also seen that when efficiency programs are combined together by governments in an effort to increase access, they can have tremendous transformative power. And so in India, it's been the leader in LED. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, LED represented a very small fraction of the overall market. The government launched a very transformative program called Ujala that basically sought to mobilize and accelerate the adoption of LED. When the program started, the cost of LED bulbs were close to 300, 350, inaccessible to most consumers. But as this program accelerated, we found that the cost dropped significantly to well below 100 rupees, and now it's closer to half of that, making it very, very accessible. Today, the LEDs now represent almost the entire market. There's still a small amount of incandescents, and tubular fluorescent lights in the market, but we think that will continue to get erased, and CFLs have been pretty much entirely displaced because of LEDs. So in this way, as more and more products come in, we find in the combination of government policies and programs, we also find that the cost of these products are going down. And finally, when you look at off-grid areas, right, in off-grid areas, or I shouldn't say off-grid, at least in India now, the segment that is totally off-grid is a very, very, very small, almost negligible fraction. The whole country has been well. But in many areas also, you find that there is elements of slightly weak quality in terms of power, not just in India, but across the world. This is a pertinent problem. And so if you want to be able to provide the same service from an appliance, say cooking, for example, or cooling, some thermal comfort that we want to provide from cooling, and efficient appliances simply reduces the amount of energy that you need in order to provide that same service. So it requires a slightly smaller solar panel, for example, if you're using it to power a home that has not had access to electricity. So for many people who don't yet have reliable access to electricity or modern energy, efficiency helps reduce the amount of energy requirement, thus making the product or service highly accessible to them. So in many ways, when we put all of these together, we find that energy efficiency, the story or the key essence of energy efficiency, isn't just about reducing energy use, but it's also about improving access. It's also about enhancing economic growth because it leads to a lot of product and innovation, which is why under CLASP, our core strategy is based around this notion of for the planet, for the people, and with appliances at the center of it.
Do run us through, Vishal, through CLASP's journey in India since 1998 and where it stands today. What are the key interventions that CLASP has made in terms of bolstering energy efficiency, and what has been the overall impact, Bishal?
As you mentioned in the start of the program, CLASP is an international nonprofit that's working with governments around the world. We've been around for decades, working primarily to bring first attention to the idea of appliance efficiency. The response to climate, obviously, as you've noted earlier, is very broad. Many people are doing many different things, and there are many solutions that are required to work simultaneously. We picked one niche that is looking at saying, look, if 40% of the world's energy use is coming from appliance, we got to focus on reducing the energy use and the energy intensity of these appliances and products and equipment. So that's what we focused on. That's remained true. We found that even as we go into off-grid segment, this remains critical. So that focus area and that niche has remained undisturbed for us. And it is one of the very few organizations that has had such a singular sort of focus on an issue that remains very critical and equally important. In India, we've been around for almost 2 decades. We've had the opportunity to work with governments, policymakers, stakeholders at many different levels. But perhaps the best way that I can describe the work that we've done in India is through a quote that I'd like to provide. And this was an editorial, an op-ed piece that was recently released by Dr. Ajay Mathur, who is currently the Director General of the International Solar Alliance and was co-written with Christopher Grandler, who is now with the Crux Alliance, but was formerly with the Environmental Protection Agency in the US. So Dr. Mathur and Mr. Grandler basically collaborated to produce this piece. And I'm just quoting from his piece. In 2006, for example, India launched a nationwide appliance efficiency program through a dedicated division of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Officials collaborated with NGOs such as CLASP to adapt key features from successful efficiency labeling programs to the India market. CLASP's in-depth analysis also helped the BEE identify which appliances it should focus on. These insights enabled the BEE to launch its star labeling program rapidly. And so I think this quote that I've just mentioned, which came out in the Guardian on November 8th, 2023, so recently published, talks about how what we've done is bring the insights from around the world, try to support policymakers in a technical partnership, try to engage with stakeholders to say, here's how data can support a re-examination of policies that can lead to an improvement of energy efficiency in appliances, product, and equipment. Our modus operandi for working is as neutral technical advisors. We're pulling together data, we're pulling together information, we're providing these insights, and we're engaging broadly, working at the states, working in the center, across a wide range of stakeholders, and we think representing a wide, diverse set of views. And that allows us to recognize not only the opportunity, but also the constraints, some of the risks, and being able to ensure that what we suggest is also a very balanced set of recommendations that would be feasible and viable. Gaurav?
Finally, Bishal, what's your view on some key government initiatives such as the LED revolution, which you touched upon briefly in one of your previous responses? Have these been game changers in reducing harm, ensuring equitable energy access, and championing integration of energy efficiency at a grassroots level? Bishal?
Absolutely, Gaurav. I think the LED revolution and the transformation that India enabled through the Ujala program was really an illustration, a tremendous illustration of how clean energy technologies could accelerate the sort of an entire transformation. And so, as I narrated for you earlier, the story of how we went from almost no LEDs and within a span of about half a decade, really revolutionized the entire lighting market. That's resulted not just in LEDs in India, but also across the world, sort of spilled over to that transformation. Over the last 2 years or so, we have had the opportunity to work with several governments around the world to support the development of a new convention called the Minamata Convention that looks to phase out toxic mercury emissions from CFL lighting, where mercury is present. So with that, we've been able to support governments, bring together collaboration, and now the convention has been adopted by countries under the framework and is looking to essentially end the trade and production of these CFLs that contain mercury by 2025, 2026. And so much of this, like the genesis of this, is of course countries coming together, and the lead up to this, we draw tremendously from the examples that India has in terms of how the LED revolution has been so transformating in able to give access. So it has not only created industries, it has not only led to sort of new lines of business, it's also helped drive the electrification process in rural areas a lot faster, while at the same time reducing a significant amount of emissions and also preventing mercury emissions, not just CO2 emissions, but also mercury emissions from CFL. And so when we put this collectively, we feel that it's very important for governments also to recognize and tap into the potential that clean energy technologies offer, and how we can combine those into programs that allow it to accelerate through the adoption initiatives such as the Ujala program.
Thank you, Bishal. Thank you for these deep insights and sharing your perspective on a variety of issues ranging from net zero to CLASP's initiatives in India and across the world, the government's effectiveness of the government's programs like the LED program, etc., and also what needs to be done to make appliances more energy efficient, and role of clean energy that we need to probably harness even more effectively. Thank you so much, Bishal, for taking the time out and dropping by to have this conversation with us.
Thank you, Gaurav. Really appreciate your time. And again, thank you for allowing me to showcase the importance of energy efficiency. And I hope that we can all continue to promote its use and its adoption of energy efficient equipment and products and appliances. Thank you, Gaurav. Thanks for allowing me to join this show.